The Mad Titan is back. Let's take a look at this crazy patch. Now, this patch is pretty wild for a couple of reasons. The first is major changes to the Mad Titan Thanos. The second is they finally fixed one of the worst interactions in the game. And the third is they didn't do anything beyond that. We're going to talk about all of those in order, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on each of those as we go. Let's start with Thanos. A few months ago, when this card was nerfed for what felt like the third or fourth time consecutively, they said, we're just going to stop it with this guy, and we will revisit him when we have compelling designs to make him care more about the Infinity Stones than he does about ramping out an early Professor X. I think that's probably a good thing long term, because when you think about what this meta has become, it probably would have just been a Thanos Professor X deck instead of the Professor S decks we have now, which would have probably just been stronger if they didn't sort of nail him into the ground with their previous nerfs. Now, however, they have finished whatever work they thought they needed to be doing on those stones, so there are now 5 different text boxes on 5 of the Infinity Stones. The only one that remains the same is the Power Stone. First up, the Mind Stone is still going to be staying at 2 cost, but it will remain drawing 2 stones from the deck. Now, what that means is you are no longer going to be drawing rocks out of your deck if you get rocks put in your deck or a Subterranea happens. You can run other 1-drops without worrying about diluting your Mind Stone pulls, and it also means that they've given up on some design space. They originally made the change to Mind Stone in order to make sure that they would have the ability to have generating random Infinity Stones be a useful thing for multiple decks. We saw this with one of the locations that came out that generates random Infinity Stones. When you get the Mind Stone off of that location, it will be totally unplayable now, but I guess that's the sacrifice we have to make for Thanos actually making sense in and of himself again. Now that this stone is drawing only other stones, it is going to be in a good spot. This is already a thing that Thanos players were and are snapping on. When I play against Thanos, which is rare but not overly rare, they are still snapping turn 2 Mind Stone. That is a thing that is happening fairly consistently. It just got a little bit better. I expect that to remain the case. One of the major advantages that Thanos has over other archetypes is that it's well worn and well understood. Everyone knows, I think, even as far down as lower ranks, that you have the turn 2 Mind Stone, you snap it. That's what the power spike in this deck actually is, and that will remain true, and I think that is a benefit of the archetype. Reality Stone's effect is remaining the same, sort of. Effectively, what's happening here is it's losing a card draw. Now, don't worry, they did put that card draw somewhere else. I think this is a sort of good way to rework these stones in that sense, because one of the major tensions in the Thanos deck was, do I play this Reality Stone or do I save it for an opportune time? I think having the ability to save it for an opportune time and not feel like you're sacrificing a potential draw is actually not necessarily a buff to this card, but since you're getting the draw back on another stone, spoilers, you will end up feeling it as a bit of a buff to the archetype, in my opinion. Whether or not it combines with every other change to make the archetype stronger as a whole, it remains to be seen, but the simple split of exchanging a draw on Reality Stone for a draw on another stone is actually a good one, because this is the only stone that you really don't feel comfortable playing out early, and you really feel as though you might get punished for playing out early, which creates tension that is now being alleviated. I'm glad they're making the choice to alleviate that tension. Now, one of the things that makes Thanos so strong is that it gets this effect for free. We'll have to see what that looks like in a world where Nocturne exists. Nocturne enables a lot of decks to get this effect effectively for free because they would be playing that 3/5 that moves anyway. However, one disadvantage of Nocturne is that it's telegraphed, and one advantage of Reality Stone and cards like it, Scarlet Witch, even Rhino, is that your opponents aren't going to know you have that, but they have to kind of assume that you have it and play around it respectfully. And I think that's a thing that I've talked about briefly in other videos. I've touched on in the context of why Magic decks are good now, is because a lot of the counterplay to Magic decks is face up. You have Nocturne, you have Snowguard. Both of those say, I'm going to turn off your Limbo very publicly. and a deck like Thanos gets to hide that information, and now you are no longer punished for hiding that information. I'm happy with this change. Here's where things start to get really, really weird. The Soul Stone is no longer afflicting negative power. The Soul Stone is now saying that Thanos cannot be destroyed or discarded in any way. So this is the first thing that is really different about the sort of modern Thanos, which is Soul Stone is now a totally different card, and it has its drawback. This is the card that is now drawing you more cards, and you are very happy to play it out there as compared to Reality Stone. I think on the whole, moving the draw from Reality Stone to Soul Stone is a great change. As far as this change, though, I really wonder about it, because instinctively, my first thought is a lot of people who are playing Thanos right now are doing so with Corvus Glaive. Is protecting Thanos from Corvus Glaive good, or is that bad? Because I think a lot of what's happening with Corvus Glaive is that you have this Thanos in your hand guaranteed, so you get to discard the Thanos and then revive it with a Hela. But it's also possible that just having a big guy that you can guarantee isn't going to leave your hand is really compelling, maybe? And with another change that's being made, again, spoilers, you might be able to curve Corvus Glaive directly into a Thanos and then do more stuff with him. So I'm interested to see if this one ends up being a buff or a nerf. I think on the whole, it's a nerf to Soul Stone, which is one of the few stones that was good on its own. But the fact that it was good on its own sort of made it problematic in the sense of, well, that was the first one they had to get rid of draw a card on because it was the highest performing one consistently because it was the one that was good on its own and also drew a card. And that was a little bit too good to exist. And I think that if in a world where Thanos becomes good again, this ends up being a pretty problematic card. It's a kind of card that can win a Professor X lane. It's the kind of card that can make it hard for your opponent to contest. It's just a little bit too good to have a 1/5 that draws a card. And so I get it. If they wanted to add the drawback onto here, they had to do something about what the effect is. Is this effect better than the previous effect of Soulstone? No. I would call this one a nerf. Now we're getting real weird. Space Stone is definitely a very interesting card in the context of a Prof X heavy metagame because what it does is effectively give Thanos the War Machine effect. Instead of moving other cards around, it gives Thanos the ability to be played into Professor X lanes or to be moved elsewhere. What's weird about this to me, though, is that you'd think it would also give Thanos the ability to move, but maybe that just doesn't make a ton of sense with a card that costs 6. Like, how is that ever actually going to be relevant? I don't really know. I honestly don't know why the move text is on here. Like, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. But there are a few interactions that I do want to highlight in this context. The obvious one is Professor X is going to be a card still, and being able to play Thanos into a Professor X lane is a good option to have and a good threat to have. The interesting thing, though, is let's say your opponent is cannonballing your Thanos, and that you want that Thanos to, not go to that Professor X lane. It will go to that Professor X lane. There is some interesting stuff there where, like, you can play the Thanos into the lane you expect them to cannonball, and then it gets moved into the Professor X lane by the cannonball. Although, the wording of this card actually says nothing can stop you from moving Thanos. Does that mean your opponent can move it? There's a lot going on here that doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I don't know why the move text is on the card, because this card costs 6, and you're not really going to be playing Thanos much earlier than that, so how much does giving it the ability to move matter? And I'm not even sure you're giving it the ability to move. I don't think you are. So why is that text on the card? I don't know. But the point is, another card that you were sort of originally tempted to save, much like Reality Stone, is now just a card you're playing out there. It's a card that you do not have to worry about outside of the very specific context of actually moving Thanos. You get to just play this, draw your card, discount your Mockingbird, not think about it. And I think that's a good thing for the archetype as a whole. Probably the biggest buff that Thanos is getting this patch is the removal of the temporary bit from the Time Stone. Now, this is notable. Thanos going to 5 cost is actually kind of crazy and can do things like make the ability to move it actually end up mattering. I don't know why. Again, I'm really stuck on this move thing because it doesn't make a ton of sense to me to put that text on the card without giving Thanos the ability to move like Jeff, but I guess they didn't want to do that, or maybe it does do that and they just didn't put the text on the card. I don't know. Card's not out yet. That said, this is very real. The ability to discount your Thanos to 5, permanently and then just not think about it at all. And this is a card that you guaranteed have in your hand. Remember, Thanos is a card you have in your opening hand every time. Means that Time Stone is always going to be doing what it's doing. And you might even have the stone that makes Thanos immune to Shang-Chi, so you're not even getting punished for playing him out early. This is exciting to me. This is, more than any of the other changes they made, something that I think could really bring Thanos back. All the other stuff, cool, I'm with it. It's clever, but it's marginal. This matters. And I'm really interested to see what the Mad Titan can do with a 5 price tag. That's it for technical wording on card balance changes, but there are some actual mechanical changes that they made to this game that will impact the power level of cards and decks, so let's take a look at that. These changes concern the ability to move. So what's happening here? What are they actually changing? What they're doing is making it so moves resolve first. This is in an attempt to alleviate one of the most frustrating issues that this game has, which is ongoing effects don't happen while a card is technically being moved. The major culprit for this is always New York. So you have something like New York and you move a Devil Dinosaur to New York, but if you don't have priority, the move doesn't happen until the Devil Dinosaur arrives at New York. And by that point, your opponent cannot Shang-Chi it because the ongoing effect is not on until the move is finished. And that specific, like, weird interaction is my guess for what prompted all of this. I remember the first time I noticed it was with a null in that exact New York situation. I moved a null to New York and then went to Taskmaster it, and my Taskmaster ended up having 0 power because I moved the null to New York after playing Taskmaster, which meant that the null had 0 power at the time the Taskmaster resolved because the move didn't resolve in time. No idea why that was in the game. Luckily, it is no longer in the game, but it does have a major impact on one of the best cards in the game, Nocturne, and as a knock-on effect, a major impact on Kraven the Hunter, which we'll get to in a second. Nocturne, a lot of her right now, the heuristic is to move her at the end. You make your plays in a location that you are going to move Nocturne to, and then you move Nocturne there in case the location turns into Altar of Death or Death's Domain or anything like that. That will no longer happen. Your ordering does not matter anymore. The moves will happen first. This also, I talked about Kraven the Hunter. One of the common lines in the Silky Smooth deck is you put a face down Kraven the Hunter, and then you move your Nightcrawler, and then you move your Jeff, and the Kraven flips up, and then the moves resolve. That also will not happen. I'm interested to see how this change is received, because it is fundamentally changing some of the baseline mechanics of the game. Another thing that I think may change is Phoenix Force. I am not overly familiar with the in-depth mechanics of how Phoenix Force actually ends up working, but a lot of that deck sort of plays around in the liminal space of what is happening to a card when it is being moved. So I will definitely be interested to see what happens to that archetype, although I am definitely not qualified to opine on it. We will have to figure that out live, as it were. So, major takeaways from this. Kraven the Hunter legitimately got a lot worse. Nocturne actually, I think, gets a little worse like this because you can no longer avoid the downside potential for her. Like, it is no longer something you can, like, fully avoid. She will sell more games like this. I have won games moving her last, and then she turns it into Altar of Death. Like, that is a thing that that ordering has mattered, and now it will not matter. There is a non-zero difference in that. I don't know how big it is, but it is real. And of course, I would keep an eye on Phoenix Force. Again, I am not a Phoenix Force mechanics master, but it does seem to occupy that space that is being affected here. I'm interested to see how it goes. And on that note, I just wanted to say to New York, RIP Bozo, rest in piss, you won't be missed. I hate this interaction. Like, the fact that the New York interaction even happens, that every time something happens on New York, I have to be like, is that card actually there? Or is it just magically totally immune to everything I'm going to try to do to it because of the way priority works with this location? This is one of the most frustrating locations in Marvel Snap. What I am concerned with is this specific interaction. It sucked, yeah. Was it enough to rework the entirety of how move works and like really throw that to your player base and say, hey, look, this thing you've been doing a certain way, it doesn't work that way anymore? I don't know. I'm really interested to find out because I think that there is a chance that this could get some significant blowback, and I'm not really sure if that's the kind of thing that's necessarily warranted, but I'm really interested to see what the community reaction here is. Finally, let's talk about the elephant in the room, what they did not do with this patch. They did not nerf Professor X, and they did not nerf Hela. Now, I do think that there are valid reasons for this. Chief among them is the fact that patches, because of the way that the App Store and the Google Play Store work, have to be locked in about 3 to 4 weeks before they actually go live. This means that any attempts to respond to the metagame as it develops will be sort of fruitless by design. You can't really sit here and go, oh yeah, they should have known 4 weeks ago what the metagame was going to be like right now. That's not a realistic thing. However, I do think that whether it be due to rage bait accounts on Twitter or people who genuinely don't know the difference, people should be educated on the differences between patches and OTAs, so I'm going to do that real quick. OTAs are the ones that you should be mad if they leave something out of. OTAs happen, I think, about a week before they are going live, so unless that thing happened in the last week, you can very reasonably say you should have known better and you should have done something about this thing. Now, whether or not that lines up with their back-end data, that's another thing entirely, but if you are convinced that you are right about that, sure, ignore it. You're on the internet. You don't have to actually be right. It's fine. Patches, on the other hand, are locked in so far before they actually happen that I wonder if there's even a point to them. I legitimately think that they should probably just do all their balancing via OTAs now that they have demonstrated the ability to change card text on OTAs. And having patches be a part of this, I think just creates unrealistic expectations. I fully expect a lot of the comments on this video to be people who are mad that they are so out of touch that they did not nerf Professor X or they did not nerf Hela or they did not do whatever, just furious at the out of touchness of it all, when fundamentally patches are an inadequate tool for doing that and OTAs are an adequate tool for doing that. If you're mad they didn't nerf Professor X, you're mad they didn't nerf Hela, I would say wait until the next OTA. If they don't do it then I think you can get mad, because I cannot think of a single reason that they can like straight face look at this meta and be like, yeah, we shouldn't make any changes to that in the OTA. That would be, I think, pretty ridiculous, and I think you'd be very within your rights to get angry at that. However, this is a patch. It was locked in like last month, like probably towards the beginning of last month. Meaning there's no real way for them to know what a post, Nocturne, Nomura metagame looks like. They can't have known that at the time that they locked this in. So I think we should adjust our expectations going forward. Patches, we shouldn't expect them to be wild. This is probably about as wild as a patch will ever get. It's like a whole rework to like the coolest card in the game. That's probably about as much as we could ever expect. OTAs, they need to step up, I think. If this is what patches are going to be, I think OTAs need to be bigger. I think OTAs need to be more on the ball. And I will be pretty disappointed if they don't make meaningful changes in the next OTA, which I believe is on the 13th of this month. All right, y'all, thank you for making it through that video. We talked about the Mad Titan. We talked about the move changes. We talked about no Prof X, no Hela nerfs. That's really all I wanted to talk about. So all I'm going to say now is thank you. If you like that video, please remember to subscribe. And of course, to fans of the snapshot, I did want to issue an apology for no episode this week. For those who are unaware, the snapshot is my podcast that I do with Brendan Patrick, Brendan APG. And he has been sick for like the past month, basically. He's been talking about it pretty consistently. I finally got him to go to the doctor. He has the flu. There was no way we were going to actually be able to record because he has the flu. So, get well soon, Brendan, of course. But I did want to mention that on my channels so that people who are going to ask, where's Snapshot at? That's what's going on. We will, of course, be back next week. As always, I've been Cam Best. You have been phenomenal. And I will see you in the next one.